Alright, so here's how it all started. You know when you order something online and you're super excited for it to arrive? Well, that was me. Except, the package never showed up. At first, I thought it might have been delayed, no big deal. But then it happened again. And again. I checked my email, and it said, delivered. But there was nothing on my porch. I even went as far as asking my neighbors if maybe it got dropped off at their place by mistake. But no one had seen a thing. Now, this wasn't just 1 or 2 packages going missing. It was 5 in the span of 2 weeks. Something was definitely fishy. I thought, alright, maybe I'm overthinking this. Could be a mistake. But still, I wasn't about to let this slide. So, I went full detective mode and bought a cheap security camera. I set it up on my porch, aimed it perfectly at where my packages were being delivered, and waited. And guess what? Just a couple of days later, I got footage. And who do you think I saw, casually walking up to my porch, stealing my package like it was his own personal Amazon delivery service? Freaking Tim, my next-door neighbor. I was livid, but instead of confronting him right away, I thought, oh no, we're going to take this up a notch. So I decided to set a trap. And boy, did I have a plan so. There I was, staring at the footage of Tim, my neighbor, just walking up like he owns the place, taking my packages with no shame whatsoever. I could have gone over there and confronted him right then and there, but I wanted to make sure he learned his lesson in a way he wouldn't forget. I thought about calling the cops, but that seemed like too much of a hassle. Besides, Tim and I had always been civil before this, and I wasn't looking to escalate things to the point of legal drama. I wanted to handle it myself. So I started brainstorming. I figured if Tim liked stealing packages so much, why not give him something special to steal? I wanted to make sure the next box he snatched would be something he'd regret. So here's what I did. I took an old Amazon box and filled it with a little surprise. A mix of glitter, old leftovers that had gone bad, and, because I wanted to be extra petty, I added a nice little note inside that said, "Caught ya." I sealed it up perfectly so it looked like a normal package, left it on my porch and waited. The security camera was ready. All I needed now was for Tim to take the bait. The next day, I left for work as usual but kept my phone on me, waiting for the notification from my camera. Sure enough, just a few hours later, I got the alert. There he was, good old Tim, sneaking up again. He grabbed the box and walked away with it like nothing had happened. Little did he know, he just walked into the pettiest revenge trap ever. Later that day, I came home from work, eager to check the footage and see if my little package had done the trick. I logged into my security app, rewound the video to the moment Tim snatched the box, and sat back, ready to watch the show unfold. As expected, Tim casually walked up to his house, carrying the package like it was just another day in the neighborhood. He went inside, and for a few minutes nothing happened. But then, oh man, I saw it. Tim came bolting out of his front door like his house was on fire, covered head to toe in glitter. It was all over his hair, his clothes, everywhere. Even from the security footage, I could tell the mess was epic. He looked like a disco ball that exploded. I couldn't stop laughing. But the best part? He had no idea who to blame. My package looked totally legit, like something anyone could have ordered. He paced around his front yard, looking confused and furious, but there was nothing he could do. He had stolen a package, after all. But I wasn't done yet. While I enjoyed the sight of Tim coated in glitter, I noticed something strange. He wasn't alone. There was a woman in his yard, one I hadn't seen before. She looked annoyed, maybe even embarrassed. Was Tim hiding something more than just stolen packages? This whole situation was starting to get weirder, and I needed to dig deeper. It seemed like my little revenge plan had set off a chain reaction I wasn't expecting. The glitter bomb worked like a charm, but now I was curious about this mystery woman at Tim's place. I'd never seen her before, and she seemed way too upset for someone who just happened to be there during the glitter explosion. Was Tim hiding something bigger? The next day, I saw her again. She pulled up in a car that wasn't Tim's and stormed into his house without knocking. From my front porch, I could hear raised voices coming from inside. She was yelling, and I caught bits and pieces of the argument. Something about money, trust, and, how could you do this? It wasn't just glitter drama, this was personal. I sat on my porch, pretending to scroll through my phone, trying to act casual while eavesdropping. A few minutes later, she came rushing out, slamming the door behind her, looking furious. She drove off in a hurry. That's when it hit me. Tim wasn't just stealing packages for the fun of it. This was part of something bigger. Was he in trouble financially? Was this woman his girlfriend or someone else he had problems with? Just when I thought things couldn't get any messier, I got a knock on my door. It was Tim, covered in glitter stains, looking embarrassed, but still trying to act tough. "I know what you did," he said, his voice low and threatening. "And you're going to regret it." I didn't back down. "Regret what? Getting back the stuff you've been stealing from me? Don't think you're in any position to make threats." He stormed off, but I knew this wasn't over. This had escalated way beyond a petty revenge prank. After that confrontation, I kept my distance from Tim, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. Every time I saw him, he looked more stressed out, pacing around his yard, talking on his phone in hushed tones. The glitter prank had obviously rattled him, but now I was starting to think there was more going on than just a little stolen mail. A few days later, I found out I was right. A package showed up at my door again. Only this time it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Tim. The weird part? It had no return address, and the label looked like it had been tampered with. I debated for a minute, but curiosity got the better of me, so I opened it. Inside was an unmarked envelope stuffed with cash. Thousands of dollars, easily. My heart raced. This wasn't just petty theft. Tim was mixed up in something serious. Suddenly, I started connecting the dots. The arguments with the mystery woman, the stolen packages, the sketchy package full of cash. It all pointed to something shady going on behind the scenes. But what? Drugs? Some sort of scam? I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. Tim wasn't just a nosy neighbor with sticky fingers. He was in deep. I didn't know what to do. Should I go to the police? Would they even believe me? Or would I get dragged into Tim's mess? Before I could make a decision, though, things got worse. That night, my doorbell rang again, but this time it wasn't a package. It was the mystery woman from Tim's house. She looked frantic, her face pale. "You have to help me," she whispered. "Tim's in trouble. And now, so are you." The game had officially changed. I stood there, frozen at my front door, staring at this woman. Her wide eyes told me she was in over her head, but something about her desperation made me hesitate. Was she in on whatever Tim had going on, or was she just a pawn caught up in his mess? I wasn't sure what to believe, but one thing was for certain. Things were about to get real. "Please," she said, her voice shaky. "I need to talk to you. It's about Tim and what he's doing. It's worse than you think." She looked over her shoulder like she was worried someone might be watching. I hesitated but invited her inside. She quickly sat down at the kitchen table, wringing her hands as she tried to collect herself. She glanced at the package I had opened earlier, and her eyes widened when she saw the cash. "That's what I'm talking about," she whispered. "Tim's in way over his head. He's been using his mail, your mail, to cover up his tracks for months. That money isn't from a legitimate source, and I think it's from some kind of illegal operation." She paused, looking nervous. "I didn't know until recently. I only got involved because he promised me he could get us out of debt. But now I know I'm in too deep." I sat back, processing what she said. Tim had been dealing with something shady, no doubt, but I wasn't prepared for the truth to hit me like this. And the worst part? She didn't seem like she was lying. There was fear in her eyes. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I need your help," she pleaded. "I don't know who to trust anymore, and I'm scared. Tim's got people after him. They know he's been using your address to send things around without being traced. You're involved now, too. They'll come after you next." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I knew one thing for sure. Things were escalating, and I had to act fast. If I didn't do something, I'd be dragged into something much bigger than just a neighbor's petty theft. It was time to make a choice. Get involved and confront Tim, or run as far away from this mess as I could. That I was pacing around my living room, trying to wrap my head around everything that had just been laid out in front of me. Tim was deeper into something illegal than I could have ever imagined. And now this woman, let's call her Jessica, was asking me for help. She was scared, clearly, but something about her was different from the typical "I'm caught in a lie" attitude. She genuinely seemed to want out of this mess, and I had to admit, her desperation had me second-guessing everything I thought I knew about Tim. As I sat down across from her, I said, "All right, I'm listening. What do you think I should do?" Jessica looked at the cash again, eyes full of guilt. "You're the only one who can stop this. Tim's been using your address for months, sending all kinds of things through the mail. And the worst part is, he's been doing it behind your back, pretending like everything's fine while you were just doing what?" I cut her off, frustrated. "Living your life, not knowing anything. I get it, but now you're involved, and it's not something you can ignore. You've got to help me get this stuff out of here before it gets worse." I felt my heart race. I wasn't prepared for any of this, but somehow, I was getting sucked in deeper. My instincts told me I should be calling the cops or at least getting the hell away from this situation. But Jessica's fear was contagious. She wasn't asking for money or trying to manipulate me into anything. I could see that much. It was like she was genuinely trying to save herself and, weirdly enough, me too. "Why me?" I asked, feeling the weight of the question. "Why not just go to the cops or get him arrested?" "Because if you go to the cops," she said, her voice trembling, "Tim will know. He's not the kind of guy you want after you. He'll make things worse for both of us. But if you can take control of this, get rid of the evidence, break his trust, you'll stop him from doing worse things. He's got a lot more people working for him now, and I don't think he's planning on stopping." I didn't know if I could trust her, but the clock was ticking, and this was escalating fast. I had to make a decision. Would I continue playing it safe and turn away from this mess? Or would I step into the chaos and risk everything to stop Tim from taking things further? I sat there in silence, processing everything Jessica had just told me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I hadn't planned on any of this. I was just trying to get through my day-to-day life and enjoy some peace after work. Now my world was getting turned upside down. But I had no choice. If I didn't act now, who knew where this would lead? Tim had already crossed the line with the mail, and Jessica was right. He could be hiding even worse things. "Okay," I said, finally breaking the silence. "I'll help you, but we're doing this my way. I'm not making this easy for him." Jessica nodded, relieved. She seemed like she was just as desperate as I was to get Tim out of our lives. "I understand. You don't trust me, and I don't blame you. But we've got to be smart about this." We made a plan, no flashy moves, no crazy schemes. I wasn't going to confront Tim head-on and risk making him more dangerous. Instead, I decided to set a trap. A sneaky one, where I'd slowly start feeding him just enough to keep him thinking he had control. But really, I was going to find a way to get the evidence I needed to finally expose him for what he was, a criminal. The first part of the plan was simple. I had to figure out when he was going to pick up his packages. Jessica had told me that Tim regularly came to my building late at night when no one was around. He used the cover of darkness to grab whatever shady deliveries were waiting for him. I figured if I could catch him in the act, it would be enough to get the ball rolling. So I waited. Every night, I'd check the mailbox around the same time, staying out of sight. After a few days of no action, I started to think maybe I was just wasting my time. Then, on the third night, it happened. A black SUV pulled up, and there was Tim, standing at the front of my building like he owned the place. He glanced around, making sure no one saw him, and headed straight for the mailbox. That was my chance. I grabbed my phone, quietly snapped a few pictures, and texted Jessica the details. "It's happening. I've got eyes on him." I didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was certain. I was going to get the upper hand on Tim, and I wasn't going to back down now. As the black SUV drove off into the night, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I had the proof I needed. I wasn't just dealing with petty theft anymore. I was dealing with something far more sinister. The question now was, how could I use this information without tipping him off? I waited a couple of days to make sure Tim wouldn't get suspicious. I didn't want to rush into anything. It was tempting to run over to Jessica and tell her everything right away, but I needed to keep my cool. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure I had everything I needed to make him pay for what he'd done, legally and in a way that would put an end to his little game for good. The next step was to collect more information. I wasn't done yet. I needed to see if Tim would keep coming back, what he was picking up, and, most importantly, how I could connect him to all the shady packages. The last thing I wanted was to take a half-baked approach. I wasn't going to let Tim walk away free. So I started doing some digging. I've been watching him for a while now, but I needed to get a little smarter. My first move was to ask around the building. I wasn't trying to draw attention, so I kept the questions casual. Just, hey, have you seen anything weird going on around here? Or, what's up with that black SUV that always parks outside? To my surprise, one of the neighbors mentioned that she had seen Tim a few more times than I thought. She even remembered him getting out of his car one evening with a large package that looked like it was addressed to someone else. That was it, the final piece of the puzzle I needed. With this extra info, I had enough to start building a case. I didn't know if I could go straight to the police yet, but at least I had something concrete. I went home that night feeling like I had finally outsmarted Tim, and I had the evidence to prove it. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I texted Jessica again. I've got the goods. Time to put the pressure on. Little did I know, Tim had already caught on, and he was about to make a move of his own. I wasn't expecting a response from Jessica right away, but what happened next took me by surprise. That night, as I was sitting at home going over the information I had gathered, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I picked it up, expecting another telemarketer, but the voice on the other end sent chills down my spine. "Hey, I know what you're up to," the voice said, low and menacing. "You think you can spy on me and get away with it? You're messing with the wrong guy." I didn't recognize the voice at first, but it quickly clicked. It was Tim. He'd found out somehow, and now he was threatening me. I wasn't sure if he'd seen me following him or if he had someone else watching me, but either way, it was clear that the tables had turned. I kept my voice steady as I replied, "What are you talking about? I don't know what you think you know, but I'm not playing any games." Tim laughed, almost as if he was enjoying the power. "You can keep playing detective if you want, but I'm done with you. I've already made arrangements. Stay out of my way, or you'll regret it." The call ended abruptly. I sat there for a moment trying to process everything. Was this some kind of bluff? Or was he really serious? My instincts told me that Tim wasn't the type to back down easily. If he was threatening me like this, it meant he had something to hide, and I wasn't about to let him get away with it. But now I had to be careful. I knew I couldn't keep playing this game alone. I had to find a way to outsmart him, to stay one step ahead. It was time to escalate things legally. I decided to take everything I had gathered to the authorities. But there was a catch. I had to be sure I had a rock-solid case before going down that road. That night, I made the decision to take things up a notch. I couldn't let Tim intimidate me, and I couldn't let him think he had the upper hand. I wasn't just going to play defense, I was going on offense. The next day, I took all my evidence and contacted a lawyer. I wasn't going to let Tim get away with it this time. As I was driving to the law office, I received another text message from Jessica. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I think you're right. Tim's hiding something. But what should we do next?" I had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was certain. This was about to get even more complicated. Tim had just made a huge mistake by threatening me, and I wasn't about to back down now. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Linda who had handled cases like this before. She listened to everything I had to say and looked over the evidence I had gathered. After reviewing everything, she gave me a calm but stern look. "You've got a strong case," she said, "but Tim's not going to make this easy. He'll try to deny everything, and he'll probably pull some tricks to discredit you. But if you're serious about this, I'm on your side." Her confidence helped, but I couldn't help but feel a little nervous. I wasn't just trying to win a case. I was exposing someone who clearly wasn't afraid to fight dirty. But Linda assured me we had everything we needed, and if we moved fast, we could hit him where it hurt. The following week, we filed a formal complaint. Linda advised me to be patient, but I was ready for action. I had already been dealing with this for too long, and I wasn't about to back down now. I wanted Tim to feel the weight of his actions. I needed him to understand that he couldn't just steal from me and get away with it. The legal process started slowly, but things began to take a surprising turn when Jessica came forward with even more information. She told me that Tim had been acting unusually paranoid lately, always checking his back and trying to cover his tracks. She even mentioned that he had been talking about leaving town soon. This was the break I needed. If Tim was planning to run, he might be trying to get ahead of something big, something he was worried about. I started to piece everything together. Tim had been acting weird, but he wasn't just stealing my mail. He was involved in something bigger, something he was desperate to keep hidden. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was no longer just about petty revenge. This was about justice. If Tim was really trying to leave town, it could mean that he had something to hide, something big enough that he was willing to risk it all. My lawyer and I worked together to gather more evidence, trying to catch him before he could skip town. But there was one more thing I needed: Jessica. I knew I could trust her, but I wasn't sure how far she was willing to go. It was time to involve her in the investigation. I called her up one evening. "I need your help," I said. "We're getting close to something, but I can't do it alone. I need to know everything Tim has been up to." Jessica hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "I've already told you everything I know, but I can't keep going down this path. What if he finds out?" I could tell she was scared, but I wasn't backing down now. "Look, Jessica, I need you to trust me. We're this close. If you help me, we can put an end to this for good." She finally agreed, and we set a plan into motion. It was risky, but I knew it was the only way to get Tim where I wanted him. The game was on, and we were about to make our next move. As Jessica and I began our plan, things started getting even more complicated. We had to be extra cautious with every move, especially now that I was dealing with not just Tim but his shady network of friends who were just as dangerous. I had no idea what I was really dealing with until Jessica told me something that completely changed the course of our investigation. One evening, while we were putting together some more information, Jessica dropped a bombshell. "You won't believe this," she said, leaning in and lowering her voice. "Tim's been working with his cousin, Jake. And Jake, he's a cop." I nearly choked on my coffee. A cop? Of course, Tim would have some connections, but a cop? That's when everything clicked into place. Tim had been acting too confident about getting away with all of this. He wasn't just some petty thief. He had someone in the system protecting him. No wonder nothing had ever stuck to him in the past. He had the perfect shield. I immediately called Linda to update her. We needed to change our approach now that we knew about Jake. This wasn't just a matter of petty theft anymore. It was starting to look like something much bigger, maybe even illegal activity connected to law enforcement. If I couldn't get to Tim, then I had to go through his connections. Linda listened carefully, her voice a little more serious than usual. "You're in dangerous waters now," she said. "But this could be our advantage. If Jake is involved in something illegal, we can use that to turn the tide. It'll be a tough fight, but it's possible." I had no idea what we were really up against at this point. But with a cop in the mix, I had to be extra careful. It didn't take long for me to realize how deep this web was tangled. Jessica, who had been helping me gather intel, started getting nervous. She told me she was afraid of retaliation. "I didn't sign up for this," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm getting out of this." It was clear she was scared, and I couldn't blame her. Tim had the resources to make this messy. But I wasn't about to back down now. I had to do what I had to do. I started getting creative. I knew Jake wouldn't be easy to crack, but he'd underestimated how far I was willing to go. I dug into his background, learning more about his connections, his colleagues, and any skeletons in his closet. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Jake wasn't as untouchable as he thought. As I worked in the shadows, gathering all the information I could, I realized that if I played my cards right, I could turn this around in my favor. But I needed to be patient. Time was on my side, and the next move had to be perfect. Little did I know, Tim was about to make a huge mistake that would lead to his downfall. The days dragged on as I dug deeper into Tim's world, but nothing concrete came to light. It felt like I was constantly walking on a tightrope, trying not to fall into the mess that was quickly becoming my life. But then, just when I thought I was getting nowhere, something unexpected happened. Tim made a huge mistake. It all started when I got an anonymous tip about a large shipment coming in from overseas. Tim had been boasting about his new business deal and how it would take things to the next level. I wasn't sure what he was talking about, but the details of the tip were oddly specific. The date of the shipment, the location where it was supposed to arrive, it was all lining up perfectly. I didn't waste any time. I started following up on the lead. The more I investigated, the more things didn't add up. This wasn't a legitimate business deal. This was something way bigger. I was dealing with a shady underground network, and I had been right all along. Tim wasn't just stealing my mail. He was part of something that could be much worse. I got in touch with Linda again and filled her in. This isn't just petty theft anymore, I told her. This could be major drugs, illegal imports, maybe even organized crime. Tim's way too involved in this for it to be a coincidence. Linda was silent for a long moment. This is huge, she finally said. But we can't go to the cops just yet. If we expose him now, everything will fall apart for you. You need to gather all the evidence first. I knew she was right. I had to be careful, and the last thing I needed was to tip Tim off before I had everything I needed to bring him down. That night, I went to the location where the shipment was supposed to arrive. It was a warehouse on the outskirts of town, tucked away behind a few industrial buildings. The area was quiet, and the only sign of life came from a few parked trucks. As I sat in my car, waiting for the shipment to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My nerves were on edge. Every sound, every shadow seemed amplified. I kept telling myself that I had to stay calm. This was it, the moment I'd been working toward. Then, just as I was about to give up and leave, I saw it. A truck rolled up, the cargo area loaded with boxes. I had no idea what was inside, but it didn't matter. This was the evidence I needed. I took pictures of the truck, the license plate, and the driver. I even managed to get a glimpse of a few boxes stacked on top. They were marked with strange symbols and codes. Definitely not something that would be found in a normal shipment. I knew then that I had to act fast. If I didn't get this evidence to the right people soon, Tim would get away with everything. But as I started to leave, something strange happened. The truck driver looked directly at me. My heart skipped a beat. Could he have seen me? Was he going to come after me? I quickly drove off, my mind racing with possibilities. This was no longer just about mail. It was about exposing a dangerous criminal network, and if I wasn't careful, it might cost me everything. The truck had seen me. There was no doubt about it now. My heart was pounding as I sped away from the warehouse, hands shaking on the steering wheel. I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me. I tried to stay calm, but I was already deep in it now. There was no turning back. The night air was thick with tension. My mind raced. What had I gotten myself into? This was way beyond stealing mail. This was organized crime, and Tim was the mastermind. I was just a small piece in this dangerous puzzle. If they found out I was the one snooping around, it could be over for me. I made a few turns, taking side streets, trying to shake off anyone who might be tailing me. I kept checking the mirror, looking for any signs of a pursuit. Nothing. But I wasn't taking any chances. I headed straight for the safe house where I had been storing the evidence. Photos, notes, even recordings of conversations that tied Tim to the shady activities. I didn't trust anyone anymore. I didn't even want to talk to Linda yet. I needed to be alone with my thoughts, to process everything that had happened. I knew I couldn't go to the cops yet. I had no idea who was involved in all of this. Could be anyone, neighbors, people I thought were my friends. I had to trust my own instincts. When I got home, I locked every door and window. I threw the curtains shut, and then I checked the cameras that I had installed around my house. To my horror, there was a shadowy figure walking by my front yard. My heart skipped a beat. Had I been followed? I grabbed my phone and called Linda, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely dial the number. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before she finally picked up. "Did you get the evidence?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I think I'm being followed," I whispered, barely able to catch my breath. I'm not sure who's after me, but I think I'm in serious danger. Linda's voice softened. You need to get to a secure location now. Don't take any chances. If they're on to you, it's not just Tim anymore. This is bigger than both of you. I didn't argue. I didn't need to hear more. I grabbed the box of evidence and made my way out the back door, sneaking through the alley behind my house. The last thing I wanted was to lead whoever was out there straight to my front door. I was on high alert, constantly looking over my shoulder as I made my way to the car. I started the engine and quickly drove off, taking the longest route I could think of to get to Linda's place. My mind was spinning with the new reality I had found myself in. The lines between right and wrong were no longer clear. This wasn't just a petty revenge against my neighbor anymore. It was survival. As I pulled into Linda's driveway, I noticed a car parked a little too close to the curb. My stomach sank. Someone was here. Had they found me? I parked a block away, trying to stay out of sight. I wasn't sure who was after me, but I knew one thing for certain. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by anyone's rules, but my my heart was racing as I sat in the car, a cold sweat creeping up my neck. I glanced over at Linda's house, still parked a block away, watching the driveway like a hawk. Whoever was in that car wasn't someone I recognized. Had they been following me this whole time? I waited for what felt like an eternity before deciding to make my move. I wasn't going to sit in the car all night wondering if they were watching me. If I was going down, I was going to do it on my terms. I grabbed the box with all the evidence, my hands still shaking, and got out of the car. I moved quietly, staying low as I made my way toward Linda's front door. The figure in the car hadn't moved, so I figured I still had a few minutes to make it inside undetected. Just as I was about to knock on the door, I heard footsteps behind me. My blood ran cold. I spun around to find none other than Tim himself standing there, a smug smile on his face. "Did you really think you could escape this? Huh?" he sneered, his eyes glinting in the dim light. I felt the anger surge up in me, but I held my ground. "You messed with the wrong person, Tim. You've been running a scam, and I have all the proof right here." I tapped the box in my hands. He laughed, taking a step closer. "You think you're going to take me down with that? You have no idea how deep this goes." I wasn't backing down. "Maybe I don't, but I know enough to make sure you'll never pull anything like this again." Just then, the car parked in front of Linda's house started to roll forward, and a figure stepped out. My pulse spiked when I saw who it was. It was the last person I expected, Linda's ex-husband. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked, my voice shaking with confusion. Linda's ex-husband smirked. "I think you'll find that the game's not as simple as you think, pal." Before I could process what was happening, a third car pulled up, and a man in a suit stepped out. He was holding a briefcase, and he walked straight toward us. "You're both in way over your heads," the man said, looking between me, Tim, and Linda's ex, "but don't worry. I'm here to make sure things go according to plan." The man opened the briefcase, and to my surprise, he pulled out a stack of papers. "Here's the real deal. All you have to do is sign, and we can avoid making this any messier. No one has to know about your little revenge plot." I blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" He smiled, and it wasn't a comforting smile. "Let's just say I've been keeping tabs on everyone involved in this little situation. And right now, I'm your only way out." For a moment, I thought I was losing my mind. Was this all just a game to these people? They had orchestrated everything, the scams, the mail theft, even the petty revenge. I didn't know what to think anymore. I turned to Linda's ex. "Is this your doing? You set me up." He nodded. "You've been playing with fire all along, and now you're about to get burned." But something inside me snapped. I wasn't about to let these people pull the strings any longer. "You want to play games?" I said, my voice hardening. "Fine, but I'm not the pawn anymore. I'm taking control." I took the box of evidence, dropped it in front of the suited man, and stepped away from him, ignoring the tension in the air. "Guess what? I've got backup," I said, smirking. "This is far from over. You think you're going to get away with this? Not on my watch." I wasn't sure how everything would unfold from here, but one thing was certain. I had just tipped the scales. I wasn't going to let these people win. As I walked away, I realized that this battle wasn't just about petty revenge. It was about taking back control of my life, no matter how deep I had been pulled into the mess. And no matter what came next, I knew I'd be ready. As I walked away from the scene, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My mind raced as I tried to process everything that had just happened. What was Linda's ex up to? And who was that guy in the suit? This was bigger than just petty revenge. There were forces at play that I hadn't even begun to understand. I couldn't help but feel a little bit triumphant. I had turned the tables on them, but there was no time to celebrate just yet. I knew I needed to make a few calls and figure out how deep I was involved in this whole thing. When I got home, I immediately picked up the phone and called my lawyer. The moment he picked up, I explained the entire situation, starting from the mail theft to the shady man in the suit. His response was chilling. "This isn't just about you and your neighbor anymore," he said. "This is something much bigger. I think you've stumbled onto something that's been going on for a while." My heart dropped. What had I gotten myself into? We spent the next few hours discussing next steps. The lawyer advised me to be careful. If I was truly caught up in something bigger, it was important not to act rashly. I needed to protect myself and, most importantly, my reputation. The next day, I went back to Linda's house. I needed to know more. Why had she and her ex-husband been involved in this? What was their endgame? I wasn't about to let this slip away. I knocked on the door, but it was Tim who answered. I barely recognized him. He looked different, disheveled and tired, as if he had just come out of hiding. He stepped aside and let me in without a word. "Look," I said, cutting right to the chase. "We need to talk. You and I both know there's more to this than just some stolen mail and petty revenge. What's really going on here?" Tim hesitated but eventually agreed to talk. "All right, fine. You want the truth? Here it is. This isn't just about you. This is about something much bigger than both of us." He explained that Linda and her ex-husband had been working together to manipulate situations and steal information from people, all in an attempt to leverage power and money. They had been using me as a pawn in their scheme, knowing I'd get too involved and end up uncovering their plans. "I didn't want to get dragged into this, man," Tim continued. "But once I realized what they were doing, I figured it would be better to work with you than against you." I was stunned. This was no petty neighborhood dispute. This was a well-orchestrated plot that had been going on for a long time. Tim handed me a USB drive. "This has everything you need to bring them down. But be careful," he warned. "You're dealing with people who don't play by the rules. Don't trust anyone in this." I left his place with a new sense of determination. There was no turning back now. With the evidence in hand, I was going to expose Linda, her ex-husband, and everyone else involved. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was far from over. What if there were more people involved? What if they were watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back? The only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't backing down. I had to see this through no matter what came next. The stakes were higher than ever, but I was ready for whatever was to come. One thing was certain. I would not be the pawn in their game any longer. This was my move now. I plugged the USB drive into my computer, heart pounding as the contents began to load. There were hundreds of files, documents, spreadsheets, emails, and even video footage. As I sifted through the information, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Linda and her ex-husband had been using unsuspecting people like me for months, manipulating situations, stealing personal information, and causing havoc, all for their own financial gain. It didn't take long for me to realize the true depth of their scheme. They had used people's personal struggles, like broken relationships, financial problems, and even legal disputes, to create chaos. They were behind several other neighborhood issues, all of which had been carefully planned out. The petty mail theft? That was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. I knew this wasn't just something I could handle on my own. If I wanted to put an end to this, I needed help. I called Tim again, and we agreed to meet in a public place. I didn't trust anyone at this point, and I certainly didn't want to take any chances by meeting him at his house again. When we met up, he handed me another piece of the puzzle, a file that linked Linda's ex-husband to several shady business dealings. It was like a web of deceit that spread far beyond my own neighborhood. This was bigger than I could have ever imagined. I didn't want to get caught up in this, Tim said, his voice low. But now that I'm in, there's no turning back. We need to bring them down. As I sat there processing everything, I realized that what I had stumbled upon wasn't just a petty revenge scheme. It was a criminal operation. And the longer I kept quiet, the more people would be hurt. I'm in, I told Tim. Let's do this. The next few days were a blur. I contacted authorities, but I had to be careful. I couldn't trust anyone. Certainly not Linda or her ex-husband's connections. Everything had to be done quietly under the radar. I sent the files over to my lawyer, who immediately started to work on a plan to expose Linda and her ex. But things started to get more complicated. I wasn't just dealing with the people I thought I was. As I dug deeper into the case, I realized there were more players involved. People I had never met, but whose names kept popping up in the files Tim had given me. These weren't just neighborhood schemes. This was something much more dangerous, and I was now at the center of it all. I started to feel the pressure building, but there was no turning back now. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stopping something far worse from spreading. And the more I uncovered, the more determined I became. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The morning I was scheduled to meet with my lawyer to finalize everything, I received a text. It was from an unknown number, and the message was short. "We know what you're doing. Don't think you're getting away with this." My heart sank. I had no idea who could be behind it, but I had a sinking feeling that the walls were closing in. They were onto me, and I wasn't safe anymore. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting Linda and her ex-husband anymore. This was much bigger. They had connections, resources, and they wouldn't hesitate to go after anyone who stood in their way. But I wasn't scared. I was angry. Angry that they had tried to manipulate me. Angry that they thought they could get away with it. And I was determined to put an end to it, no matter what. The real battle was just beginning. And this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. The message sent a chill down my spine, but I knew I couldn't back out now. If I did, they'd just keep hurting people and getting away with it. I had already come so far, and backing down wasn't an option anymore. I wasn't going to let these criminals destroy lives. I contacted my lawyer immediately, explaining the text and how I felt like I was being watched. He assured me that everything was still under control, but even he seemed a little worried. This was escalating fast, and it wasn't just about some petty revenge anymore. It was something far more dangerous. I decided to meet with Tim again. We needed to get our story straight and make sure we were ahead of Linda and her ex's next move. Tim agreed, and we set up a meeting at a secluded park where we could talk without being interrupted. As we sat on a park bench, I could tell something was off. Tim was acting a little strange. He kept looking over his shoulder, glancing around nervously. It was like he was waiting for something. "I'm telling you, this isn't just about the dog," Tim said, almost in a whisper. "They've got people watching you. They know what you're up to." I swallowed hard. "I've been getting that feeling too." Tim leaned in closer. "There's more, man. I've heard rumors that Linda's ex is involved with some dangerous people. People who don't take kindly to being exposed. I think they're coming for us." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. My mind raced, trying to piece everything together. If Linda and her ex were tied to dangerous people, there was no telling how far they'd go to protect their operation. Just as I was about to respond, I saw something move in the bushes across the path. I froze. It wasn't just a bird or an animal, it was a person, and they were definitely watching us. My heart started pounding in my chest. "We need to go now," I whispered to Tim. We both stood up quickly, glancing around. The person in the bushes had moved closer, but we couldn't tell if they had been spotted. We walked quickly toward the parking lot, trying to stay calm, but I knew the danger was real now. When we got to my car, I noticed a black SUV parked nearby, its engine running. It was too coincidental. Someone had been tailing us. We couldn't risk staying here any longer. I turned to Tim, my mind racing. "I'm going to make the call to the authorities. They'll need to know what we've found. If we're in danger, They have to act fast. Tim looked unsure. You sure that's the right move? We don't know who we're dealing with. I don't care. We've come too far to back down now, I said firmly. We both got in our cars and drove off in different directions, making sure we weren't being followed. I couldn't help but feel the weight of what I was doing. I was taking on an entire criminal network, and I had no idea how far they would go to silence me. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and careful planning. My lawyer and I worked on gathering the final evidence we needed to bring Linda and her ex down. We had the files, the proof, and now we had the backing of law enforcement. But just as things were starting to feel like they might be under control, the unexpected happened. I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Your dog is still ours, Linda's ex said, his voice low and threatening. You should have stayed out of this. Now there's no going back. I felt my blood run cold. They had my dog. The one thing that I had fought so hard to keep. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This had become personal. I'll be there in an hour, I said, hanging up the phone. There was no way I was letting them win. Not now, not ever. As I made my way to their hideout, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just getting my dog back. I was bringing an end to this nightmare once and for all. They had no idea what they had started. And this time, I was ready to finish it. I arrived at the location Linda's ex had given me. It was an industrial building on the outskirts of town, the kind of place you wouldn't expect anyone to go unless they had something to hide. My heart raced as I approached the entrance, knowing that this could be the moment that everything either ended or escalated further. I parked my car in a dimly lit corner and grabbed the bag with the evidence I had gathered. My lawyer had told me to keep it on hand just in case things got ugly. This wasn't a confrontation I was going into blindly. I had a plan. I walked inside the building, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The place smelled like stale oil and concrete, the kind of smell that made you feel like you were stepping into a trap. There were no windows, and the only sound was the echo of my footsteps on the cold floor. I called out, I'm here. Let's settle this. A figure emerged from the shadows, Linda's ex. He was flanked by two men, both of whom looked like they meant business. They weren't here for a friendly chat. You're not getting the dog back, Linda's ex sneered. You should have stayed out of this. You've made things a lot more difficult than they had to be. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I didn't want to make this difficult, but you gave me no choice. I'm not leaving without my dog. He laughed, and it was cold. You think I care about your dog? This isn't about that anymore. It's about power, control. But I wasn't about to back down. This wasn't just about the dog anymore. It was about taking control of my life again. I reached into the bag, pulling out the evidence, documents that linked Linda and her ex to some shady dealings. You think you're the only one with power? I've got everything I need to send you to prison. And I'm not afraid to use it. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. The two men with him looked uneasy too. I wasn't sure if they were worried about the evidence, or if they realized I wasn't someone they could just intimidate. You're bluffing, one of the men said. But it was clear he wasn't as confident as before. I smiled, knowing this was my moment. Try me. Linda's ex hesitated. I could tell he was weighing his options. After a few tense seconds, he finally spoke. Fine, he growled. You win. But this isn't over. We'll find another way to settle the score. I shook my head. It's over for you. You're not getting away with this. With that, I turned to leave, my dog finally by my side again. I knew that, while this chapter was over, the ripple effects would be felt for a long time. But in that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't had in weeks. I had fought for what was right, and in the end I had won. As I walked out of that building, I knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. The story wasn't over, but this was my victory. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me.